Rob stood in the kitchen, stirring his coffee slowly, a slight tremor in his hand. He hadn't slept well for weeks, ever since he had noticed the subtle shift in his wife Abby's behavior. Their relationship, once so passionate and filled with trust, now felt hollow. It wasn't anything drastic, nothing obvious, like an affair. No, it was something quieter. The sudden late nights at the office, the extra time spent getting ready in the mornings, and the phone conversations that ended abruptly whenever he entered the room. He could have ignored it, buried his suspicions, and moved on like so many other husbands do, but Rob wasn't like other husbands. He loved Abby deeply, and that love, as it turns out, could easily turn into something much darker when tested. Abby had always been the confident one, the social butterfly. She worked as a project manager in a trendy tech company, and her position kept her busy. She was smart, driven, and beautiful, with just enough charm to make people like her instantly. Rob admired her for all those things, but recently he had grown suspicious of her newfound interest in self-exploration. Something didn't feel right. The idea came to him when she first mentioned it. "Rob, I think I need to explore more of myself. I need something new to make me feel alive again." Her words stung, the way she casually tossed them at him, as if she were talking about trying a new yoga class instead of shaking the foundation of their marriage. Rob forced a smile, pretending to be interested. "What do you mean, Abby? What kind of exploration are we talking about?" Her eyes sparkled as she dove into her carefully rehearsed speech. "I love you, Rob, you know that, right? But I feel like there's something missing. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I read this article about how some couples reinvigorate their marriages by dating other people." Rob's blood froze. His mind screamed betrayal, but outwardly he remained calm. This was what she wanted, to break him, to test his limits. But he wouldn't give her the satisfaction, not yet. "Date other people?" He raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. "You mean like an open relationship?" Her face lit up with relief, clearly expecting an argument. But his calm response had thrown her off. "Exactly, it's not about love. It's just about trying something new, forbidden fruit and all. It's supposed to strengthen marriages in the long run." Rob took a long sip of his coffee, buying time. His mind was already racing with plans that involved far more than a simple discussion about opening their marriage. If she wanted to play this game, he would make sure she regretted ever suggesting it. The cruelty of what he was about to do settled into his bones like cold steel. "So let me get this straight, Rob," he said, his voice neutral. "You want to explore yourself more by dating other men? And depending on the situation, you might end up sleeping with them, right?" Abby blinked, startled by his straightforwardness. "Well, yes, I guess, but it wouldn't be like that. It's just a way to feel alive again, to make us feel more connected in the end." Rob grinned and stood up, leaning against the counter with a casual air that didn't match the rage building inside him. "You know what, Abby? That sounds like a great idea. I think you're right. Maybe it'll spice things up." His words dripped with false enthusiasm, and Abby couldn't tell if he was serious or not. "Wait, so you're okay with it?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Of course," Rob said, the grin on his face widening. "In fact, I think it's an awesome idea. Why didn't I think of it first?" Abby's confusion was palpable. She had expected resistance, maybe even a fight, but not this, not complete agreement. She started to speak, but Rob cut her off. "Tell me, Abby, who's the lucky guy? Or are you still looking?" Abby blushed, hesitating before she answered. Well, there's someone at work, Brandon. We've been talking a lot lately, and I think there might be potential there." "Brandon." Rob's smile faltered for just a second before he regained his composure. Brandon was Abby's coworker, a young, fit, and single guy who had always seemed a bit too friendly for Rob's taste. Now it all made sense. This wasn't about exploration or self-discovery. It was about Brandon. Rob let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head as if he found the situation amusing. "Well, if that's what you want, then go for it. I've got no problem with it." In fact, he reached for his phone and dialed a number, glancing at Abby as he waited for the call to connect. "Grace, hey, it's Rob. Listen, I was wondering if you're free this weekend. Abby and I are trying something new, and I'd love to take you out to dinner. What do you say? Abby's eyes widened in shock as she watched Rob speak so casually with their neighbor Grace, the tall, voluptuous woman with the kind of curves that turned heads wherever she went. Grace had always been friendly, but Abby had never seen her as a threat until now. Great, Rob said into the phone. I'll pick you up at 7. He hung up and turned back to Abby, whose face was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Wait, you're going out with Grace? Abby stammered. Rob shrugged, his smile never leaving his face. You're going out with Brandon. I figure it's only fair you explore your options. I'll explore mine. We're in this together, right? Abby's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But I didn't say you could date other women. This is about me, about what I need. Rob raised an eyebrow. Oh, I thought this was about our marriage, about both of us. Isn't that what you said? Forbidden fruit and all that. The look of panic on Abby's face was everything Rob had hoped for. She had expected him to roll over, to protest and beg her to reconsider. Instead, he had called her bluff and raised the stakes in a way she hadn't anticipated. Now she was the one struggling to keep up. You can't be serious, Abby said, her voice trembling. Grace? You barely know her. Rob crossed his arms, his eyes cold. Does it matter? You're ready to throw away our marriage for Brandon. Someone you barely know outside of work. What's the difference? Abby's face flushed with anger. It's not the same, and you know it. You're being petty and spiteful. Rob laughed, the sound dark and humorless. Am I? Or am I just doing exactly what you asked for? If this is about exploration, then why shouldn't I explore too? Abby shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to be like this, Rob. I thought we could talk about it. Figure things out. Oh, we're figuring it out, all right, Rob said, his voice ice cold. And you're about to learn that every action has consequences. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Rob made sure to casually drop details about his upcoming date with Grace into conversation. He made sure Abby saw him texting Grace, his phone buzzing with playful messages while Abby sat across from him, seething with jealousy. The tables had turned, and Rob reveled in her discomfort. One night, while Abby was getting ready to meet Brandon for dinner, Rob stood in the doorway watching her silently. She avoided his gaze as she applied her lipstick, her hands trembling slightly. Have fun tonight, Rob said, his voice laced with mock sincerity. I'm sure you two will have a great time. Abby didn't respond, her face pale as she finished her makeup. She left the house without a word, and Rob knew she was starting to regret her decision. But it was too late for regrets. Later that evening, Rob's phone buzzed with a message from Grace. She was ready to meet him for their dinner date. He smiled to himself, knowing that the real fun was just beginning. At the restaurant, Grace greeted him with a warm hug, her body pressing against his in a way that made his blood simmer. She was stunning, her curves accentuated by the tight dress she wore. Rob couldn't help but enjoy the attention, knowing full well that Abby would hate every second of it if she found out. They spent the evening laughing, talking, and drinking wine, their chemistry undeniable. Rob found himself genuinely enjoying Grace's company, but his mind kept returning to Abby and how much this would hurt her. As the night drew to a close, Rob walked Grace to her car. The two of them stood close under the dim streetlight. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his cheek as she whispered, I had a great time tonight. We should do this again. Rob smiled, his mind already racing with the possibilities. I'd like that, he replied. He watched her drive away, his heart pounding with anticipation. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking control, about showing Abby that she wasn't the only one who could play this game. When he returned home, Abby was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at him, her voice shaky as she asked, Did you sleep with her? Rob's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold detachment. Not yet, he said, his voice flat. But I will. Abby sobbed, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her own guilt and jealousy. Rob stood there watching her crumble, and felt nothing but satisfaction. She had wanted to explore the forbidden fruit, and now she was paying the price for it. In the days that followed, Rob continued to see Grace. Each encounter drove a deeper wedge between him and Abby. He knew she was struggling with her own feelings of guilt over Brandon, but he didn't care anymore. This was his revenge, and he was going to savor every moment of it. Eventually, Abby broke down completely. She begged Rob to stop seeing Grace, to forgive her for even suggesting the idea of dating other people. But Rob was beyond forgiveness. He had tasted the power of revenge, and he wasn't ready to let it go. Rob watched as Abby unraveled before his eyes. What had started as a cold, calculated plan for revenge was evolving into something far more intricate and painful. He had assumed that once she tasted her own medicine, Abby would back down, and perhaps things could return to some semblance of normal. But now, standing over her as she sobbed on the couch, Rob realized that the damage they had done to each other was irreparable. His heart should have ached, but instead, there was only a deep emptiness. Abby wiped her tears and looked up at him, her voice small and broken. "I never wanted this, Rob. I didn't think it would go this far." Rob remained unmoved. He had given her plenty of chances to back out, but she had pushed forward, full of naive arrogance, thinking that she could have it all. Her stable marriage and her tantalizing flirtation with Brandon. And now she was paying the price. Rob had learned that people often don't understand the consequences of their actions until it's too late, until the damage is irreversible. "Didn't you?" he asked, his voice void of any emotion. "You thought you could spice things up by sleeping with another man. You thought I would just roll over and let it happen. So what did you expect, Abby? That I'd wait here like a loyal dog while you had your fun?" Vi's face twisted with pain and regret. "I thought it would bring us closer. That maybe we could." She trailed off, realizing how ridiculous she sounded. Rob shook his head. "Closer? You wanted to sleep with someone else to bring us closer." He let out a bitter laugh. "You've been lying to yourself this whole time, Abby. You didn't want to fix our marriage. You wanted an excuse. You wanted Brandon." Abby flinched as his words hit her like a sledgehammer. "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I wasn't looking to leave you, Rob. I thought this would make us stronger. It's just that I wanted something more." Rob could feel his anger boiling over again, threatening to consume him. "Something more?" he repeated, almost mocking her. "And what was I, Abby? Was I not enough for you? Was 8 years of our life together not enough?" "I was wrong," she admitted, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. "I see that now. I should never have brought it up. But please, Rob, we can fix this. We can still save what we have." Rob stared at her, his expression hardening. This was the moment she had feared most. The moment when she realized that her gamble had cost her everything. But as much as Abby begged and pleaded, Rob knew that things could never go back to the way they were. Too much had been said. Too much had been done. And worse, he had lost any respect he once had for her. "What's left to save?" he asked coldly. "You gave up on us the moment you decided Brandon was worth risking our marriage for." Abby choked on another sob, burying her face in her hands. Rob turned away, unable to look at her anymore. Her brokenness didn't move him the way it once would have. Instead, it left him feeling nothing. He had gotten the revenge he sought, but it hadn't given him the satisfaction he thought it would. It hadn't healed the pain of her betrayal. It had only deepened the chasm between them. He moved to the window, staring out into the dark. "Do you think Brandon would have been worth it?" Rob asked, his voice eerily calm. "Do you think that one night with him could have erased 8 years of our life together?" "I never slept with him," Abby screamed. Her voice was raw. "I never even wanted to. I was just confused, Rob. I thought maybe if I explored something new, it would reignite what we had. But I realized now how wrong I was." The confession was desperate, and Rob heard the truth in it. But it didn't matter anymore. Whether or not she had physically been with Brandon wasn't the point. The fact was, she had wanted to. She had entertained the idea long enough to discuss it with him, to test the waters, to fantasize about what could be. And that was enough for Rob. It was enough to destroy any faith he had left in their relationship. "Rob," she whispered, standing up from the couch and crossing the room toward him. Her voice was shaky, but she was trying to keep it together. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. But please, we can still work through this. We can go to therapy." "No," Rob interrupted, his voice low and final. "There's nothing left to work through, Abby." He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw the true finality in his eyes. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization dawned on her. He wasn't going to fight for her. He wasn't going to forgive her. He was done. Rob's phone buzzed on the counter, cutting through the silence between them. He glanced at it briefly, another message from Grace. Abby's eyes followed his, and her lip quivered as she spoke, barely above a whisper. "You're really going to keep seeing her?" Rob didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up his phone, looked at Grace's message, and pocketed the device. He walked past Abby toward the door, stopping only briefly as he turned to give her one last cold look. "I told you, Abby, this is what you wanted. You wanted something new, something exciting. So go ahead, explore. But don't expect me to wait for you anymore." With that, Rob left the house, leaving Abby standing alone in the living room, tears streaming down her face as she watched the door close behind him. She had wanted freedom, and now she had it, but at the cost of everything she had once held dear. As Rob drove away into the night, his mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions. The revenge had been sweet, but in the end, it had also been hollow. He had lost just as much as Abby had, if not more, but the difference was he was ready to let it all burn. By the time Rob reached Grace's apartment, the weight of everything that had transpired began to sink in. Grace greeted him with a warm smile, unaware of the storm raging inside him. She was a beautiful distraction, and Rob was more than willing to lose himself in her for a while. But deep down, he knew that no amount of revenge, no amount of distraction, could undo the damage that had been done. His marriage was over. His trust was shattered, and the life he had once known was gone forever. In the end, both he and Abby had played their hands, and as the pieces of their broken marriage lay scattered around them, Rob couldn't help but wonder if either of them had truly won.